Welcome again. Thank you all for coming back to our continuing conversation on how we use the advantages that we have to try and rebalance some of the inequities in the world. I want to reset again that this is a dialogue. Again, we try and imagine that there's a hexagonal table amongst us, and there's a lot of preconditions about how that table works. One, of course, is confidentiality. We don't attribute. We always take whatever lessons we have, we're welcome to share it, but please no attribution of any anecdotes or stories to anyone. The purpose here is to try and use our stories as gifts to each other so that we can move our understanding of ourselves and the world and then move towards action. At the end of the day, our idea is to move towards action. A lot of our discussion so far has been reflection and understanding, but also action. And I think, again, one of the things that we have to keep in balance here is to be able to do both of those. One of the points that Pallav made last week, which still resonates with me, is just understanding our privilege as an advantage is a process. It takes time, it takes reflection. So let's make sure that we give that time, but also make sure we move towards action. We've been able to maintain that balance in the last few weeks, so let's continue to do that. As part of the dialogue, one of the things that always happens when we get together is the idea of presence, to actually be when we say in the room, it's much difficult because we're not in the same rooms, but actually in this dialogue. And one of the most critical aspects of that is getting rid of other electronic distractions like your phone, there you go, like the phone and other things. But especially in the Zoom environment, to get rid of other windows, because we all know in most meetings, while we're having the meeting, we're also answering our email or dealing with WhatsApp and all of those things, right? But here, for this dialogue, I think it's important for us to be very present. Now, our process has always been that we have a couple of people, a couple of our other fellows who start us off sharing their journey and their stories with understanding their advantages and what it's meant for them. And from those stories, we launch off into a dialogue. So today, I'm really excited to have Amrish, Kumar, and Radhika Piramal. And I'll let Amrish and Radhika introduce themselves as well, which class you're from, Amrish, and Radhika, and what you're currently doing very quickly, and then jump into your stories. But before we go in there, can we just do a quick round? And I think for this round, what I think we'll do is just say your name, your what class you're from, and a color that describes how you feel today. Okay, a color that describes how you feel today. So I'm James Abraham from KBF 3, and my color, actually, it's been the same color for the last 3 weeks, is blue, and that's not because I'm blue in an emotional sense, but because I'm actually looking at blue sky here in Toronto, and what's interesting is it's the same color blue sky that I left in Gurgaon, and in my life, I have not been able to say that until now. So that's mine. Let's see who, Viraj?
Hi, so Viraj Advania, KBF 4. The color is the same, blue, as James, but just I don't have a good reason why that color popped into my head.
Okay, pick the next person, Viraj.
Kiran.
Okay, so my color is pink, just because I'm seeing lots of flowers around, and my sister's painting these days, and she's just painted a bunch of red pink roses and sent me, and so that's really fresh in my mind and looking beautiful. So that's the color for me.
Okay, pick the next person, Karen.
Ajay.
Hey, Ajay Nair, I'm KBF 7. My color is green. We just got a green couch today, but also I'm starting to get out of my COVID cynicism and things are looking. I just see a green flag. I see opportunities.
Pick the next person, Ajay.
Radhika.
I'm Radhika. I'm same class as Ajay, KBF 7. And I'm going to keep going with the green theme because I'm on the other side of I've got my iPad propped up against a window, and behind that is green trees. And over to Sumita, please.
Hi, I'm Sumita. I'm from ILI class 1, and my color is blue. Actually, it's eternally blue. I'm going to ask Neha to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Neha from the class 7 recent class now. I think I'm going to stick with the green actually. Lots of green trees here and enjoying the blue skies as well.
Neha, pick the next person.
I will pick Viraj.
Viraj is done.
Oh, Viraj is done. Sorry. Samir.
Hi, Samir from New Delhi, KBF 4. I actually will pick entire kaleidoscope of color because for the last so many weeks, I've been straddling with the very, very dark, the very, very vivacious. So I really can't hone in on one color. It's the entire kaleidoscope. And I'll pick someone, Aditya Somani.
Yeah, you are allowed to do that, huh, Samir? You can't choose everything. I'm Aditya from ILI 4, and I'll choose Yellow Sunshine. And I'll pick Pankaj Sari.
Hi, my name is Pankaj Sani. I'm KBF 7, and I pick pink for absolutely no reason whatsoever other than I'm wearing a pink shirt.
Good enough reason. A good enough reason. Pick the next person, Pankaj.
I pick Jehan.
Jehan.
Hi, I'm Jehan. I'm from KBF 7, and I picked the color yellow because it's the traffic signal light, which is the go, no go, and you're about to like go or not go, and that just seems to be my perpetual state of being these days.
Okay. Jehan, you have to pick the next person. I think you have Reshma and RK.
I pick Reshma.
Hi, I'm Reshma. I like 2, KBF 2, and my color is white, which is unusual because I would never say that. But I think it's also because it is a black canvas, I think. It feels like a black canvas. Yeah. RK.
Hey guys, RK, KBF 2, green. I can see green all around me. So.
Yeah, so can we. Wonderful. I think we've covered everybody. Yes. Amrish.
Hi everyone. I was going to choose green because even I can see green, but there are too many greens. So I'm going to go with black because I'm wearing a black shirt. And lives matter.
Okay. Wonderful. All right, good. Thank you. It's great to get everybody's voice in to start out with. One of the mechanics that we're going to do first of all, I just want to recognize one thing. Last week, we talked about an action step around volunteer networks, and Sumita had talked about a paper that she was putting together, and she sent a draft copy of that out, and I'm just reading through it, and we were talking about distributing it to everybody so we can all contribute to it and build it and think about what the next steps and action items should be for that. So that's really exciting. So we'll send that around if that's okay with you, Sumita. Great. And also I want to recognize Viraj was inspired last week and wrote out an entire treatise. It was wonderful. I just had a chance to quickly go through it. I'll go through the whole thing, and then maybe Viraj, you and I can talk about how we use that going forward. Wonderful. All right, so some of the mechanics of how we're going to do this. We ask everyone to keep themselves on mute, and whenever you want to speak, just unmute. That's the equivalent of raising your hand, and it'll allow me to just kind of moderate the discussion. All right, so we'll start with a conversation. We'll have Amrish and Radhika each talk for 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a dialogue for all of us, right? Radhika?
Sure. Should I kick it off?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you all for being here. I really enjoyed the first Omela. I'm sorry I missed the second one. And thank you, James, for the invitation for me to speak. I was thinking over, I want to share 2 stories with you. The first is sort of what is my privilege and agency, and I'll describe myself. And then the second is sort of the way I'm thinking of some of the trade-offs in terms of me living my life the way I do. So what is the privilege and agency? I was born in a business family, wealthy family in Mumbai, and grew up going to private schools. And then for undergraduate, I went to Oxford. And then for MBA, I went to Harvard Business School. So the whole package is fairly privileged. The one thing that was a bit different for me in my life is when I was 15, I realized I was lesbian. I came out to my parents when I was 17, and then sort of age 17 through 30, I'm going to say I was out to my friends and family, but not out to the whole society. And then, I met somebody, and I wanted, she was my life partner, and we wanted to move back to India together. And I'd been out in New York, and I didn't want to go back in the closet if I moved back to India. But my father wanted me to come back to India to work in his business, which is VIP luggage. And I asked him, then can Amanda come with me? And he said, you know what, let's do it. Let's make it work. It'll be fine. And it was fine. And all of, I sort of convinced each rich, sober person one at a time that it's okay. And then it went further, and then I was outed by the Mumbai Mirror. And then I started speaking in the media, and I came out at work and all of that. And so then the question is, what gave me that confidence to come out? Actually, privilege gave me all that confidence to come out. So structurally, the situation is that my boss, who is my father, is somebody who accepted me at a very early age, and lucky me, despite being Marwari, accepted me, right? And so with that structural power at my side, the question what will happen if you come out never happened, because structurally that's what I mean by privilege. So if my father, who's also my boss, accepts me, then nobody in the company could do anything against it, right? Because I was the MD for like almost 10 years. And so no employee can complain. No customer will complain, because in the end, money is more important than, principles. And no vendor also would complain, right? Because why would they do that? And so it was fine. Literally nothing happened. I came out and nothing happened. So that's privilege. And I understand that. And then I was thinking about what are some of the trade-offs, and what have I done in the last 3 months since COVID. Obviously, a luggage business is really badly affected. We really have very, very low revenues compared to before, and not a lot of clarity on the future. So, without thinking at all and without second guessing myself, I've very, very quickly moved to reduce our workforce. And all I've done in COVID is let go of, in total, I don't know, like maybe 2,500 people in the last 3 months. Took that decision mid-April, checked in, this is confidential, right? So we're talking confidentially, checked in with my Aspen buddy Pratibha in terms of employment labor law. She said, Radhika, in the end, it's your call. I said, you know what, screw this government advisory. I don't think it's got any legs or teeth. And I just went ahead and did what's right for the business. So obviously I'm not that pleased with myself, right? Because great, I saved my dad money, and I probably saved the business. And so an already rich man can look forward to one more generation of wealth being handed down, and the business VIP will certainly survive and prosper. So what to do? I mean, in a way, I'm stuck to the same question I was when I was 18, and this was my last anecdote, and then I'll hand over. When I was 18 years old, I loved liberal arts, and I was studying politics, philosophy, and economics, and I was thinking about what should I do for the rest of my career. And I did a summer internship with Pratham, which is an NGO, a famous NGO in India, does a lot of work on primary education. And I spent my summer sort of going around, Dharavi slums and all of that, and visiting Balwadis. And at the end of that internship, the leaders at the time, was one Rukmini and one Mr. Kamath, I think. And they both said, Radhika, you are absolutely wasting your time in the NGO sector. We would much prefer it if you went and joined your dad in the family business. And then once you're successful and settled and organized and rich, you can give back to Pratham, or you can go on and do whatever. But you working in the NGO sector is not like the best use of your time and privilege. So I took that to heart, and definitely joining government was not an option for me. But from the beginning, I felt that the poverty and the class issues we have in our capitalist system and the gross inequality is wrong. Well, how do we fix it? And I still don't have that answer. So I'm not sure that leading a business is the answer. I definitely feel that joining government's not an answer. And maybe the NGO sector is not an answer. So maybe if we can work out what are some answers, I would be very grateful for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Radhika. Amrish?
Hi, everyone. This is Amrish. I was in the 5th class, the famous 5. it's nice to see so many new faces, and most of you I've not spoken to or seen or met before. So, hi. So when we were chatting yesterday, James sort of let it quite open as to what we was to speak about. And a couple of things came to me, and both of these are to do with the last few months we've been having, the crisis that we've all sort of lived through. And because Radhika just left off on a particular point, I'll start with that. I think similar to her, there is the trade-off between what the business needs and what we tell ourselves that we must do for the greater good because we are privileged. One of the struggles that I had, and this was especially early in the piece, when we started seeing stories about migrant labor and all this other stuff, like Radhika, one of our the business's first reaction is always to shore up, and that usually means letting people go and those kinds of things. So yes, I think the question about, what is the greater good in terms of a business versus something that's perhaps harmful for the business, that's a question, I admit, and we all deal with that. But I'm going to take it a little. I'm going to try and take this question to a personal level. What I was going through, and although there was a part of me that really wanted to become more involved, I realized that in order to galvanize a significant momentum behind me to do something, I needed other people with me, and these were other people within my business. These were other people in my industry. In order to do something significant and something of some scale. And I quickly realized that I was coming up against different points of view. And these are not people who necessarily are heartless or care less about what's going on. This tended to be perhaps different generations, people who've been brought up slightly differently. And I'm talking about people who have the ability and privilege to do something about it. Eventually what happened was, there was always a question of survival versus survival of the business versus, what more we could do. And I do believe that survival of businesses are important for the greater good as well. But eventually what happened to me personally is I said, me trying to galvanize so many forces is not happening. Let me just do little things myself. So I ended up doing those little things. And the question I had to keep asking myself, I had to second guess myself. I had to ask myself, am I thinking the right way? Is this really the direction one should take? And I was coming up against opposing points of view. And I think we all have that. So that was one point that I'd like to put out there. And the second thing was, one has been doing many things. Like from the beginning, we started making masks because that's what we thought was required. And we made PPE kits because we thought that was required. We contributed money. We made calls to the people who are on the field. And eventually, as I said, I tried to do something small, and me and a friend have tried to sponsor 20 COVID patients who can't pay for it. Little things. But honestly, I caught myself thinking, all of this really should have an emotional impact. But somewhere along the line, it's left me a little cold. Even the things that I've done have left me a little bit cold. It hasn't made any real emotional impact. I'm not saying that one hasn't done the right thing, but it just hasn't had any kind of reaction. So these are the two things I wanted to just put out there, and then we can discuss. Thanks.
Thank you both. Without going into specific questions, let's just have an open discussion. What of what Radhika and Amrish talked about resonated? Resha?
I think it's hard. I would not want to be in your shoes ever. And I think, interestingly, and I've been part of the first two conversations, right? And I think a lot of us are from neutral places, in the sense that the potential, cost to us was not substantial. I mean, what is the cost? You might lose your job or whatever. But I think that it was probably easier for a lot of us to internalize that and then, step out and want to do something in the current context. But I think that it's really hard when you're part of large systems that work with certain incentives and that work, with certain goals. And these are hard calls. So I don't have an answer. I'm just, I was just listening to both, both Radhika and you, Amrish, and I realized that perhaps you're numb because the choices themselves are very hard to make. And maybe it's not going to hit you or get processed now, but this is, really when you're trying to, at some level, provide relief to people, but you're also taking tough decisions at work in terms of layoffs. I don't have an answer. I'm just saying that I have a deep appreciation now for where both of you are coming from. And I'm glad that you actually put this out right now. It's a very sobering realization for me. I think the conflicts that some of us are dealing with are of a different nature, but it's many times over. Sorry, I don't have an answer, but I'm just putting it out there that I don't envy the position you're in.
Thank you. Ajay?
I think the numbness is very familiar. And I feel like, I've worked in public health and in sort of low resource settings pretty much all my life. And I feel like you see the first person die, you see the second person die, and then, at some point, there is no other way to deal with this besides being cold and numb inside. You still do what you do, but how much can you really feel? Also, how much can you really feel knowing that, for most of these people, you're not going to be able to do much. I think the most emotion I felt was right after med school. One of the first things I did was I was running a clinic for sex workers in a red light district in Bombay. And I had this one patient who was my age. I was 25. I think I was fresh out of school. And she used to work for, I was working for a nonprofit, and there was an outreach team. So she was a sex worker who worked in the outreach team. But we became friends. We would sit and chat, and she got, and this is an HIV clinic, so she got diagnosed, and it's a long story. I don't want to go into it's also a little, but she eventually passed away, and I went to the funeral, and it's the only patient's funeral I've ever gone to, and that is probably the peak of emotion I felt, and this was 2004. Right, and I don't think that I can feel that again, because then I just won't get to work.
Yeah. It's interesting, that feeling of numbness is almost something you need to get the work done, as opposed to getting paralyzed. That's the way you're, Ajay? Yeah.
That's how I see it right now. I don't know. That's how I'm making sense.
Thank you. Neha?
I think for me, there's the numbness is sort of coming from, or I don't know if I can call it numbness. I'm just borrowing a word, but there is a sense of being overwhelmed with what it is, and one might say humbling in one way, but in another way, it just feels so insignificant, because I kind of feel like, especially working in emotional health, in mental health, I feel like even if we do everything, it's just not enough. There's just, so maybe it's, I keep talking about helplessness is not hopelessness, but I'm kind of feeling hopeless sometimes, because I just feel like it's just not ending. It's getting worse. Nothing is enough. And how much to, at some point, I just feel like just saying, I don't know, because it just even if it takes everything out of you, it's still like a drop in the ocean. So there's a sense of feeling very, very overwhelmed, very fatigued, maybe even slightly burdened, and this need to take on sort of, or just by the fact that we're sitting in a home where we're protected from the virus outside means we've inherited a certain quantum of guilt, because it's attributed to the privilege we have. And so now, we just somehow have to do enough sometimes to justify that. I feel like that can be fatiguing. And it might take away from the feel good of actually doing what we want to do. and enjoying doing that, no matter how small.
Thank you. Since we picked up this theme, Amrish, I wanted to ask you, did these comments resonate with the way you were feeling?
Yeah, well, they do resonate, absolutely. But I think where Ajay comes from and where Neha is coming from is, is very profound. It's humbling because they spend their lives doing a thankless task almost. For me, it was perhaps something a little less intense. It was more a question, I come from a different place. I'm literally not saving lives with my own hands, which you guys are doing. I'm taking the form of a philanthropist, for want of a better term. I'm doing what my guilt, for want of a better term, pushes me to do. And it's not like, of course, it's nice to say that you're not looking for any kind of immediate dopamine reward, but eventually you imagine there would be some kind of, again, pardon my scientific terms, warm, fuzzy feeling of, getting involved. This time, these last few months, it's been a little strange and detached. So I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you. Sumita, you were coming in?
No, I just wanted to, listening to Radhika and Amrish, just wanted to say that, these are most definitely very confusing times. There's so much of I think we're overwhelmed, all of us, because it's, the multiple massive crises that have come at the same time in our lives, whether it's COVID and its, repercussions on your business, on your personal lives, etc., etc. And then with it, now the protests, I mean, it's not just here in the US, I know it's everywhere. All of us are, rethinking, kind of reevaluating our lives. So it's a very, very confusing time, and I can completely, I hadn't thought about it till you both spoke, but I can feel the same confusion in my head too. But looking at, I am very hopeful. There are opportunities here, and I listened to Amrish, and he said a word that kind of, struck, it resonated in my head when he said emotional impact, that maybe nothing he's done is having that emotional impact and he's feeling numb. And again, it takes me back, and also something that Radhika said, it still takes me back to the idea of, actually doing something hands-on. And that's where, you get you really start feeling the impact. And I know you can give and you can do a lot by giving, but unless you've actually seen with your own eyes, and I don't mean seeing migrant labor walking on the streets, that's not seeing pain and, really, at least for a couple of, for a short period of time, experiencing or understanding the depth of that challenge and difficulty that people face in their lives, which we as privileged people, by and large, don't have to go through that for a single day of our lives. And then it takes me to what Radhika said. Radhika, you talked about Pratham. Interestingly, Pratham's own model, at least the time that I knew them, for a decade or around 15 years, their model is to take young people from district level colleges to do what they call their first tool was called Paheli. It's a people's assessment of, initially it was just education, and then they expanded it to make it people's assessment of health, education, livelihoods. And they would take these young kids from district colleges, train them in a very quick survey tool called Paheli, people's assessment. That's the acronym Paheli. And these young people would go to homes in rural areas and actually, conduct that household survey. And then they would extrapolate the survey results and give feedback to policymakers like district collectors, state governments, national planning commission, etc. So I'm just thinking, and I know I'm just, thinking aloud and seeing if I could help you with your dilemma, is that while you continue to work on your father's business, maybe think of, the inspiration from that Pratham model and how you could expand it in a big way. I mean, they're doing fantastic work, and I think they are able to do it in only few districts and states. I don't think their model is countrywide right now, but they do. That's something that could really be scaled up.
Radhika, you want to talk about that before I go?
Yeah, I think one thing that's helpful from that, I think, is if I was to spend time, I think instead of just money, I do think I would feel better because I would feel more connected. And I think y'all talked about that at length, right? Proximity last week. So I do think that would change the way I felt emotionally. And it doesn't even have to be Pratham, but that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Jahan?
So I'm torn because somewhere when Radhika spoke about her story about Pratham saying, don't stay in the NGO sector. This is not where you're most useful. I'm paraphrasing. And then Radhika didn't think government was going to be it. And she said, capitalism isn't it. And then Amrish spoke about, doing things as a philanthropist. All of this is because the systems that we're working at, and I don't really, it's not my intention to intellectualize this thing and take it out of the personal, but I'm going to do that for a few seconds, so just bear with me. I mean, the system is getting us to, the system itself tells us we've got to look out for ourselves, put on our own oxygen mask before we can put on anybody else's. Then for some people, the oxygen has to be, a huge amount or whatever it is. And, even through my Aspen journey over the last year, working in the arts, I told times, look out for yourself, out your ability before you keep on to do the good that you are intending to do. Because if you're not in a good position to do good work, you can't, benefit other people. And that's the advice that I've also got back. And all of this advice is coming from a place of, well, this is how the world works and this is how the system works. So when we sit down here gathering around, what can we do about it? It's almost like we do have to look like either we accept and are very okay with the fact that this is what it is, the world is what it is, the forces of nature are what it is, and we can't do anything that is systems change level stuff. And then we have just agency. And thinking about the last week's session where I thought that the conversation which was really exciting was just how do we give more and more people, because even in the reading that we did a few days ago on universal basic income, just the idea of agency and giving it to the people who can actually do something with it on their own terms without us playing any kind of solver role. Is that where something lies? Because until such time, the system also, by the way, the system also teaches us that there is no way you can carry the emotional burden of all of it. You have to be numb. And that numbness doesn't just happen at Amrish or at Radhika's level. It happens at my level when I'm just like, down at the junction and decide whether 10 rupees out of the board. So this is there here. So these are my responses. And we do systems change, even if the system, the old uncles who would sit there and say, why are you getting so fun with all of this stuff? Karma, this is the rest of what you have. I mean, I can hear them in my listening to these conversations. Sorry if I put a cat amongst the pigeons.
Thanks, Jan. I want to add one more layer into this, and then we can pull it all together. One of the points that Radhika made was her point of power or privilege was to be structurally accepted by her boss, her father, and that gave her structural power that was effectively unquestioned. Or, people say, okay, that everything just came put behind it and off you go. Do you all also have that same position where you're structurally accepted, where you have a position of power that is effectively unquestioned, not like you have a blank check, you can do anything you want, but certainly much more so than most people around in terms of your power is unquestioned. And how does that play into the way you think about what you do or have to do?
James, can I
RK,
comment?
you were,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I will pick up from what Radhika and Amrish said. And I think that kind of resonates with what I said last time, that privilege is an opportunity to serve. And I think Radhika learned it by going around, checking it out, being with NGOs, and she realized that, okay, it's good for her to go. And being in privilege, born in privilege, having privilege wasn't something she was feeling bad about. However, she went out and tried to explore. And then I think she came to a conclusion that, yes, I need to be in privilege and use that as an opportunity to serve. And I think Amrish used the word philanthropist and the word called guilt. And that's something which I really feel a lot of people around us feel, and they feel because of the noise we have in the system that being in privilege is something which you shouldn't be. And that's why people feel guilt and they end up doing philanthropy and things like that. I think that narrative needs to change. Being born in privilege or having acquired privilege, which we discussed. Some of us were not born in privilege and we happen to be in privilege now. But that shouldn't be something to be feel bad about, or something to be kind of being told that it all depends upon what we do with our privileges. And to the point that at some point there will be an opportunity where everybody takes care of themselves and nobody is privileged or underprivileged, and privileges don't have to go and help the people who don't have privilege. That day might come someday. I don't know. But here, I think till that day comes, people in privileged position, maybe the privilege of money, a privilege of power, or privilege of decision making, or policy making, or doing a pilot which can be scaled to policy, whatever it is, as long as it is being helpful to those who may use that help. I think being in a position of privilege is actually a privilege, and it should be cherished. It should be kind of celebrated, and then of course there shouldn't be a reason or feel guilt that okay, now I'm privileged, I must do it. You should do it just because being in privilege is an opportunity to serve.
Thank you. Okay.
So, I mean, 3-4 different reactions. First, just to what Radhika and Amrish said, and I think, look, the decisions that that get taken at that level when you're part of a system, which actually you're not taking at an emotional level, for the most part, you're taking at a rational level. I think they're the right decisions, and they do have short-term pain, but I think they're the right decisions. And I think the fact that both the emotions are there, right? So Radhika expressed the fact that she's not feeling good about some of the decisions that she had to take, and I think Amrish expressed the fact that he perhaps didn't feel as much emotion as he thought he should have felt. And for me, at least, this resonates a lot. And I think actually the fact that I am actually still on this Aspen journey, and I go back to literally, the first seminar where I didn't really know what this Aspen thing is all about, is actually quite helpful to me. And I've actually struggled with it a lot. And what I've come to terms with, and maybe it's just an excuse to not get off my backside, but what I've come to terms with is that realization is actually an important step also. And so the fact that you're slightly feeling uncomfortable is actually part of that process. And that's one of the things that I've realized for myself is something important. However, and maybe I'm a little bit more familiar with some of the stories than the others or the folks on this call, is that I think when I look at this for myself, and I was definitely born into privilege, but maybe my privilege got better. Maybe I married more into privilege. Maybe I've earned more into privilege, or whatever you may think about it. But I definitely feel that I've become more privileged since over the years. At this point in time, and James, you asked this question about you sit in a position of power, and I'm just wondering with Radhika and some of the other folks, you sit in a position of power, and there is often a perception in your system that you actually wield more power than you do. So in my case, I work for my father-in-law. We run a hospital. every day I can, much before COVID, every day I can make decisions that will allow hundreds and hundreds of people to have a better life. I can reduce the tariff, I can treat more free patients, I can show more empathy, I can change the systems. I have a lot of power. And so the question, and some of this came out in globalization, the question is, why don't I exercise that power? And I think that the reaction that happens is that it actually is not really about money as much as it is about the interpersonal relationships across a variety of levels that you are scared about. And I go back to the whole Martin Luther King thing about the fact that you have to sacrifice something. And I think that what we actually struggle with is not sacrificing money. We struggle with sacrificing relationships. And so if I have to go and say that I want to do more free treatment, I have to go and first pick a fight with my father-in-law. Then I have to go and pick a fight with my financial investors. Then I have to go and pick a fight with the doctors who are demanding more money for this. And I actually am uncomfortable with the fact that the decisions that I may take may be wrong and may have negative consequences, and somebody is going to turn around and tell me, see what an ass you are. Look what you did, you destroyed this company. And if I think about where I am today, my father-in-law has a 30 or maybe more year legacy of treating patients and a 10-year legacy of building the institution that he's built. And I could say that I want to do something which is really benefiting people, and I feel that it's an important thing, and I could destroy that. And everybody's going to say, see, it's always the second generation that screws it up. And that creates some amount of nervousness. But at the same time, I don't think I can be that guy who walks in today like, Jack Stack and says, you know what, guys, I'm giving 30% of the company away to the employees. I don't have that power. So I think that where I'm struggling, and I'm just trying to kind of relate to some of the stories I've heard, is that I think we end up struggling at a place where you say that you think you know what's the right thing to do, but you're also torn about whether it is the right thing to do because you're actually wondering about managing other stakeholders. And my only reaction is that one day you will be the one, or I'll be the one who actually has all the power to make all the decisions. And the question is that I think as long as we keep up this struggle, hopefully at that point in time, we'll use this struggle to make better decisions rather than, be in a certain place where we'll say, now that I'm the one who has to be fully responsible, I can't let this, so many years old company go under. And so therefore I'm going to make the same decisions that have been made over so many years. So that's kind of where I am. I'm totally confused about how to do it. I just want to leave with the last thing, which is that we were discussing this in Globalization and Aspen. And the book which was assigned, which was No Longer at Ease, which I, by the way, was not at all one of my favorite readings. And one of the people in that conversation mentioned, Pankaj, you are no longer at ease. And that is the purpose. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Pankaj. Yeah. Amrish, you want to come in?
Yeah, Pankaj articulated what I was trying to say better than I did. So the first point I was making was actually exactly that. The conflict that I was facing through intergenerational dynamics about, and the things that I had to overcome in order to try and achieve what I thought was right. I mean, Pankaj, you said at the end of that, you said at some point you'll have all the power to make all the decisions. I don't think that ever exists. It's the illusion of power. I think at that point you'll have other decisions to and other stakeholders to deal with, and that is something I think there's a struggle in all of this, especially in a time of crisis like what we've just gone through. When things are great, yeah, sure, we'll donate somewhere and we'll help this one and we'll do that one. We've got time, we've got bandwidth. I think what's brought to light significantly now with everything that's going on, the fact that we're not alone. We need to take our stakeholders with us. I mean, we're interconnected with a much larger ecosystem, and our morality, for want of a better purpose, has to also work the same way we do in our businesses or our NGOs or our hospitals or what have you. We have to learn the skill to be able to take people along with us. Something I don't think I'm great at yet, but that was, I think, broadly my point. But thanks for making my point better than I did, Pankaj. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to stitch a couple of these things together as we get into the last few minutes here. So last week, and RK repeated again today, he brought RK mentioned the idea of privilege as agency, as an ability to do something, and that we should and today he also mentioned this, right? We should be proud, or we should cherish our privilege and use it. This week, we've been launching into this idea of how difficult it is to actually act within that, and how even when we try and do it, there are other systems, as Jahan said, there's a system that we operate in, there's a difficulty of legacy that we have to continue, there's a, and even when we try and act and do stuff, it doesn't seem satisfying in ourselves, right? So this is and there are these, while everything is going on around, I talked about different emotions, coldness, numbness, guilt, the feeling of privilege, but the feeling of being trapped. Like you see both of these things happening. This is kind of the gambit of where we are. Here's our challenge for us. I think it's impossible for us to act if we are trapped in this kind of a situation where we have privilege, we are stuck with a system that demands we act a certain way because that system does need to be protected, but we feel we need to and we're numb and cold. That won't work. That just, we can see it just will not work. So we need another way around this. Radhika.
I have a question for the group, because I also don't want the conversation to just go like this. Can anyone share any example where they made some decision in their personal professional life where they gave up their privilege, or they maybe shared their privilege in a way that actually worked out, so that I can answer this question off my head of somebody give me some example where they did something, public sector, private sector, anything that they felt genuinely, materially helped others. It would be helpful to hear that from our Aspen fellows. Surely somebody in this group's done something.
I know Jahan and Neha have their mutes off, so you're welcome to come in. Anyone else want to jump in on Radhika's question?
I think linking to Radhika's question is just this idea of sacrifice. Whenever it is that we're kind of really feeling uncomfortable and getting to a place where now we own our choices and we're able to make them, it's in whatever I've experienced, not just in work, but also in personal life, I feel like it's always very hard choices. There's always sacrifice. It's oftentimes it's two positives pulling in. So two things that are very important, both dear to you, that are pulling in opposite directions. And the example, at least in my kind of work, because a lot of what I'm doing in mental health is talking about my own family's mental health issues and what everyone's gone through. And very often, a lot of that comes at the cost of personally challenging conversations within the family and questions around that, right? And in a way, it's a trade-off. I know that I'm choosing to give away a bit of privacy, a bit of anonymity, certain sensitive details maybe about things that are normally considered family reputation and honor and all of those sort of big glorified things in exchange for greater good, where I have no idea what impact it will make, right? Just throwing it away just like that, it's a big sacrifice, and there's always a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Unless somebody has a question, unless somebody has an answer directly for Radhika's question first.
Why don't you go ahead? Maybe
James, sorry, can I come in again? Quick one. Okay. So I was very interested. Of course, for me, it's difficult to understand because I was not born in privilege. I also didn't marry in privilege, like Pankaj said. Both for Radhika and Pankaj, it's very interesting, and maybe I'll have a private. How difficult, I understand your dilemma. First generation builds, second generation enjoys, and third generation destroys, correct? But within the four walls of whatever constraints you have, instead of you trying to going all out and giving everything free or whatever you want, do you feel constrained even to do that much, which you feel that, we all ran companies and we did whatever we could. And of course, we didn't blow our company, to the ground. Those dilemmas are very difficult for me to understand. And if you can get over the dilemma, maybe you might be in a better place in your own mind and in your own heart.
Okay. Yeah, Jahan, go ahead.
This is basically called Omelas 2.0. And basically every conversation we seem to be still whether you choose to leave Omelas. But there's no question of staying in Omelas and doing anything about it. The child has to stay in the basement for it to all work. We know this. And so everything that we do within this, if we follow RK's methodology, or if we, do whatever we want to do right now, it's never going to be enough because the system is what it is. And then you just make your peace with it and stay in Omelas. But I do not have any solutions to the idea of walking out of Omelas and leaving it. And I'm bringing it back to that because that's just what it feels like to me eventually. It feels like it's like everything is about preserve Omelas or leave Omelas, because Omelas is not changing.
So we don't yet have an answer to Radhika's question. I mean, Jahan is underlining that problem right now. Yeah.
So I was born into privilege, and that I recognized that privilege very early on because it was all too apparent. And I think one of the things that has really stuck with me is a thing that my grandfather has always done. So I've actually seen him doing it. That he said that a charity of time and money is something which you have to do. It is not a privilege that you have to do it. It is a part of the cost of living that you have. So at times when people say that, oh, how do you manage to be part of this? Or, where do you get the time to do this? And something that somebody asked me, just a couple of years ago, then I said, I don't know, because it's become as much of a habit as, possibly waking up and brushing your teeth, right? So I think when we talk of the privilege or having the privilege, we need to make, or at least I have tried to make it as part of the routine. So it is not something that I'm exceptionally proud of. Yes, if I stretch myself and I do a lot more, then I feel, oh wow, I did this. Okay, but as a normal case, and which is, I think, many of us who have either been born into privilege or have earned that privilege, if you structuralize it, that it is part of my structure, and usually money is the easier thing to do. It's the time which is tougher to do. But if you begin taking that time out and that money out, and it is not something that you pat yourself on the back of, this helped me, because I think that it's helped me to develop a far more rounded view of the world, as opposed to what it would have been had I just been in business. Because I do know that there are a lot of peers, and there are a lot of colleagues and a lot of friends who are in similar situations, do not have the visibility and the empathy that I feel I have, and that I think that makes a difference. That I don't count it as a privilege. That's a cost, or it's so structuralized. There is really no big deal.
Sumita, I know you want to come in.
That was an answer to Radhika's the dilemma, because it's something that I've always been, and also because a similar kind of a background, Marwari family, so how it works. Money is a very important part of our lives.
That's right. Yeah, and I like the phrase you used, Aditya. The cost of living. This is a cost of living, right? The way you phrase that. Sumita, I know you want to come in. I want to add one more angle to this conversation. In this discussion, and I've noticed this in the past as well, we all feel like individuals inside to use Jahan's term, system, or wherever we're operating. We come here, we're a group, and then we go back as lone actors. And I think one of the platforms, advantages, privileges, whatever you want to call it, that we can use as agency is each other, is us. And the question that I have is that I don't think it's easy. You cannot rescue the child from the basement, to use that analogy alone. I think that just doesn't work, right? And we all know that. But is there a model that allows us to leverage each other, that allows us to step out and scale, satisfy all the responsibilities we have, but actually rebalance inequity as well? So because the feeling we're not going to escape this trap that we just talked about if we try and sit alone and think ourselves out of it, because that's just not going to work. Sumita?
No, I just wanted to maybe try and give at least some answer to Radhika's, not exactly sharing privilege, but I think it's always a question of choice. It's not that it's not in our hands. I can understand. I mean, I can't actually relate to what you and Pankaj and Amrish have talked about because I'm not at all, I've never been in that position. But at the same time, there are choices that each of us make at any given point in time. And I mean, I'm thinking of the only time in my life that I had to make a big decision in my generation. And I'm kind of probably a decade older than most of you. In my generation, every single bright, intelligent, sharp person in my school ended up going to study abroad and never came back. I didn't do that at that point in time, but I did end up going for my master's to Europe. And as soon as I finished studying my master's, I got my first job offer. In fact, I had not even finished college, and the offer was at the International Atomic Energy Agency at the UN in Vienna. And I could have just grabbed it because that's what I wanted to do always, diplomacy and international relations. But I very consciously, at the age of, I think I must have been 24, very consciously decided that I want to come back and serve in my country because India actually needs people who are educated more than maybe, any other country or organization in the world. And that to me was, now that I'm thinking about it, I never thought about it all these years. I think it was giving up some, privilege, and maybe my life would have taken a very different course had I done that then. And I'm also thinking a little bit about what Pankaj said. Pankaj, you talked about your dilemma with your the business that you're in with your father-in-law. I'm just wondering what, I think it's Medanta, right? I'm just wondering what Medanta has in terms of telemedicine, not in the context of COVID. Everybody is doing telemedicine in the context of COVID, but I mean more in terms of enhancing access for underprivileged and looking very closely at models like Narayan Hridayalaya and Dr. Devi Shetty, because it seems to me that he's managed to strike that balance of business and yet carved a niche of, a space where he can give access to people at a low cost. So I don't know, that's not a real full answer, but it is something worth exploring.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so don't believe everything you hear about Narayan Hridayalaya, but that's a side note. I think I wanted to react though to what RK said, which is, what's stopping you from making small moves? And I think the real honest answer is nothing, laziness. So my kind of self-push out of this effort and I guess some of the discussions we've had in various forums in general is to say that I do think, and COVID is actually kind of giving more weight behind this thought, is that I think all of us have the ability to actually exercise our privilege in our local environment, right? So if you really think about it to some extent, to say that, let's step away from my system and say that, look, you run a business. How many people within 1,000 people within whatever X kilometers of your business, your office, your factory, your home, what are we doing for them? And if you look at what happened in COVID, I think most of the help and support actually was very, very localized. I talked about this in our group, hyper localized support, right? You will give food to the migrant labor in the construction site three houses away from yours. So I think my push is to say that, look, you've got to make some of these steps, and not making them, like I think RK said, is basically just laziness, and we actually self-justify various excuses around it. However, Sumita, I do think that it's important, at least when I think about it in my institution, to think what are you actually putting in place structurally, because there will always be some point in time when you will be busier with something else. And so my kind of challenge is that you're not doing anything because you're trying to find the greater solution, and finding the greater solution is not happening right now. And I think Amrish talked about this initially as well, is actually trying to say that, okay, let's do something that you at least feel is a first step in that greater solution, right? And I think that it's really about figuring what that is, and then picking that path and moving towards actually some kind of action, starting very hyper localized, and then just hoping that there is an opportunity for that to scale. And to James, your point, how do we use our tribe and our community? I think actually, if you think about it as a web of interventions rather than one intervention that they're trying to scale massively, I think the Aspen community is actually exceedingly well positioned to interlock a whole web of interventions that would be extremely diverse, that actually collectively have very powerful impact at scale.
James, the quick one. So I think Jehan every time keeps bringing about, and I think Radhika also, that Omelas will remain where they are. I mean, nothing is there. Actually, I have a little perspective on this. I want to just 1 minute. So there are very few societies, I would say the countries, when I say societies, have managed to do where privileged versus underprivileged gap is very, very narrow. And that was done by design. It is neither socialist nor capitalist. Look at Japan. I lived there 10 years. I think one of the countries where very few people will call themselves very privileged. And there are hardly anybody who is underprivileged. Not everybody is living a very rich life or very poor life. And that was done by design. And I'm sure a lot of people would have that knowledge and they could read about it. Some other countries, Nordic countries, have managed to do it, but in a very small population. So I think that would not be the right example. Yes, societies over a period of time with kind of concerted effort may reach a stage where there'll be nobody underprivileged. However, the societies where, despite huge disparities, they still have managed to remain a functional society are only because there are some privileged people who try to do something. Yes, ideally, as Pankaj said, a very big effort, large project is very difficult, and I think we should start a little bit. I'll give you a little example. Try to work from pilot to policy, because scaling things at scale in a country like ours, it really needs a policy level intervention, and policies usually are poorly directed because there hasn't been any successful pilots. I'll give you a little example. In 2011, I started rural BPO first in India in my village in UP, Sitapur district. Today it is 450 people, largest rural BPO of the country. But after 5-6 years of running, I worked, given my background, worked with the government. And finally, they came up with a policy of rural BPOs in India. Now, every district of the country has a rural BPO, where CapEx came from the government and then OpEx they are managing on their own. Not that it has changed the scenario or has removed everybody out of poverty, but totally there are around 3 lakh people working in these rural BPOs, and of course serving anybody in the world. I mean, in India, mostly telcos and others. I believe those 3 lakh people potentially got out of the basement, and that was possible with a small effort which individually was done. And then we worked very closely with the system. Jehan mentions about system. System does change, but you have to have a little bit of initiative first, and then show that it can work and work out a framework where your pilot becomes a policy. Many times what we mistake is we try to continue and try to keep it into the private domain. I mean, we'd like to say, okay, well, if my NGO is handling one village, I want it to handle that one district, then one state, then whole country. And I think that then NGO becomes a system. And then kind of it loses the vigor and the passion which it started with. So if we can convert that pilot to policy and bring it out from private philanthropy or individual effort to public domain, where there is an accountability from electorate, accountability from the system, then I think the system also improves and the impact is much larger.
Thank you, RK. Ajay, I know there's a couple other people that want to come in. I'm a little conscious of time, so last words, Ajay, and then we'll.
Very quickly, I think RK said that the solution landscape is fairly complicated, and there's a lot on when you look at solutions out in the world, and I think it's very important to keep doing. I don't think that there is a time when like somebody said, I don't think there's going to be a time when you have absolute power. And personally, I feel like I'm always falling or flailing, but at least I'm falling forward. And there's stuff that is ongoing. and I think that keeping doing is very, very important.
Thank you. I'm going to tie some of these bits and pieces together to make sure we have something that we take back about what we need to think about before we get together next week. I'll pick it up from the last words from Ajay and RK about keep doing. It ties to Aditya's comment about this is what we have to do: take out time, money, effort, and just keep at it. But it's not just about keeping at it. We have an advantage in our group of us if we do things, even small things individually, but together. What RK suggests, that you can take these things, think of them as pilots, not as just an initiative, right? They're pilots that together we could actually turn into policy and scale. RK, that's I think where you were going, right? As opposed to just incidents. Now, I've been struck this week by Amrish's point about feeling cold and numb, which we talked about at the beginning, right? And I think it has to do with this feeling of being trapped when we do something and it just doesn't feel like it's enough, while there's trade-offs going on, right? And there is this opportunity to take that little action, put it inside a network of actions that actually can scale. So the question for us as we think through next week is, in the stream that we're in the coming week, what are the things that we can do, right? Small things, time, money, effort, whatever, and whatever you're already doing that you can bring back to this group where people can also start to connect into, that can then create the scale and the policy impact that we want to. So that's our action to do. And I wasn't going to do a reading. However, in the middle of this discussion, a reading struck me. So Samir, I'm going to ask you to read this last paragraph out for us. Yeah.
Oh. Some author that I have met with compares a judicious traveler to a river that increases its stream the further it flows from its source, or to certain springs which, running through rich veins of minerals, improve their qualities as they pass along. It will be expected of you, my son, that as you are favored with superior advantages under the instructive eye of a tender parent, your improvement should bear some proportion to your advantages. Nothing is wanting with you but attention, diligence, and steady application. Nature has not been deficient.
Nothing is wanting but attention, diligence, and steady application, to the point that we talked about. This is a piece from a bigger piece called, interestingly, Privilege and Responsibility. I mean, this fits perfectly, right? I will put the bigger piece on our chat group. So our to-do, we find that piece that we're going to do and bring back to each of us. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Bye. Thank you.